Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
Senate Republicans voice concerns over the recent uptick in crime, call for an outside investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, and weigh in on the need for policing reform. Plus, more funding for child care assistance and the retirement of a long-term senator. Stay tuned for this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. Senate Majority Leader Paul Gazelka announced a new Oversight Committee to examine accountability into the recent uptick in crime.
Today we're announcing that the Senate is going to hold a series of oversight hearings starting July 1 that are focused on the state and local responses following George Floyd's death. We all witnessed the destruction of businesses, some in broad daylight, with no police response, and the question was, who decided the looters would be allowed to do that? Just one example of me I went down there about 8 times, and there was one business owner that literally had looting beginning on Tuesday. George Floyd tragically died Monday. Looting began Tuesday, and they restocked their shelves thinking it'll be okay Wednesday. But suddenly the police weren't there Wednesday and everything was wiped out. And so who allowed that and why?
And Republican senators spoke to the press about their request to the Department of Justice for a special investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department.
The state of Minnesota is not capable of conducting a fair and impartial investigation into the George Floyd incident. Given the type of a reaction that we received from the Commissioner of the Department of Human Rights, who obviously has already made a determination in her mind that the Minneapolis Police Department is a racist organization. And so because we feel that neither the city nor the state of Minnesota has the subject matter expertise or the wherewithal to conduct a fair and impartial investigation, we have requested that the Department of Justice conduct what's called a pattern and practice investigation.
Almost from the moment George Floyd was killed, the eyes were on the Minnesota legislature, in fact, asking, what are you going to do about it? And we can ban chokeholds, and we can add training hours, and we can do a lot of things, but are we in fact really getting at police reform, and are we really getting at what in fact the George Floyd incident was all about? And so as we think about it, at least as I think about it, it's not about Wadena or Winona or anywhere else, Wilmer. It's about Minneapolis. What do we do as a state legislature about Minneapolis and what happened there, and how do we restore public confidence to, in fact, the citizens of Minneapolis, and particularly the minority communities, relative to their own police department? A community that doesn't have confidence in their police department is a community that has some problems.
What kind of a message did the City Council send out there to the people that we've hired to do the job that nobody else wants to do? Furthermore, what kind of a message has the Asian gangs, the gangbangers, the organized criminals that actually work, live, and commit crimes in the city, what do you think they're going to think? The city council, if I was a city policeman, I would say, boy, I don't have much support here. And fact of the matter is, if I make some kind of an arrest and it gets a little shaky, I'm going to be on trial. Again, that's not to minimize the George Floyd incident whatsoever. But these guys that put the uniforms on, guys and gals, are human beings, and they're going to react accordingly. And I've always said, you're only going to be as good of a police department or a sheriff's department as your community will allow you to be. And they're certainly sending a strong message that they don't care for the people in blue. And believe me, the bad guys are listening. They're paying attention to that.
Joining me now in the studio is former Douglas County Sheriff and Senator from Alexandria, Bill Ingebrigtsen. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
In reference to your request to the Department of Justice for a practice or pattern investigation into the Minneapolis Police Department, are you at all concerned about the perception that this simply kicks the can down the road?
No, actually not. It's a unbiased outside agency that's going to come in and investigate the potential of problems in a law enforcement community. I think somebody, it's always been a rule of thumb, at least when I was an administrator over law enforcement, if there was a problem with one of my officers or a problem with one of my actions, we would have somebody else come in and investigate. The further away, the better. And in this case, being it had such global results or terrible things that went on, we think that the Department of Justice is exactly the one that should investigate this.
Now, according to Senator Newman, it could take up to a year, and there are inflamed passions right now.
Well, certainly.
So there will be some delay. There are people who want action now. What do you say to those people?
Well, I'm not sure what action that they're going to get now without this, quite frankly. I think this action, should the Department of Justice decide to do it, we'll find out within a week's time. The investigation will ensue. They know what's going on. They watch this. They follow this. But I'm not sure that putting the folks in charge of looking into the investigation, as the governor has done, is really going to move any faster. In fact, they're really too close to the case. Seriously, they really are. And there again, that's why you go outside.
Following the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, Minneapolis adopted the police reforms based on President Obama's Task Force for 21st Century Policing. Following the death of George Floyd, it would appear that those reforms were insufficient. Is there a need right now for further police reform, even before waiting for any further investigation?
Well, and that's what an investigation is all about. If you're going to look at the incident that happened the other night, one would sit back and say, if everybody in that department is acting that way, or approaching the public with that same kind of an attitude, absolutely you would want to dive into that. I think we just do it anyhow. I think we still go ahead and do that. But that you can't lump everybody in on one person's actions. As a matter of fact, we already know that there's something in place to deal with that, and he's sitting in jail right now. He broke the law, or alleged to have broken the law. Very clearly, everybody has an opinion on that. But we got to be really careful that we don't do a knee-jerk reaction to this. But yes, move very quickly is important.
You made the point that police reforms aren't simply for Minneapolis, but for all 3,500 peace officers working around the state. But does this mean that what's good for Minneapolis may not be good for the rest of the state, or is it just important to find that balance between all law enforcement practices working equally well, no matter where you are?
I think it's an equal balance. You work wherever you are. The laws in Minnesota pertain to this are enforced the same in Kitson County, Roseau County, as well as in Fillmore County, as well as in Minneapolis. The only difference would be is you have local city ordinances that might add on to the top of state statutes. But state statutes have had a lot of discussion over the years through the committee that I sit on, the Judiciary Committee, and those take time. They take an awful lot of time. And to just, in general, just go ahead and do that because our emotions are getting the best of us, that's not a good practice. And that's going to affect all of law enforcement in the state. And that's why I'm spearheading this, because I do care about the rest of the officers.
One issue that's yet unresolved in negotiations between the House and the Senate for some police reforms deals with warrior-style training. To that end, the Minneapolis Police Department did ban those kinds of trainings, but then the police union offered them for free, according to an article in the Star Tribune. So does that send a mixed message to officers, like, who do I follow, my police department or my police union?
Yeah, I don't like that. I don't like the title of that. If I was the chief or the sheriff, I would say you better change your product here, at least the name of it, because it's not going to come here. Now, if it were self-defense, you may see the same tactics used in this particular thing. I think it's just a catchy phrase, but it's not one that I would want the public to know that my officers were being trained by. It's simply not a good idea. The perception is bad.
The finger pointing now is reaching a national audience. Minneapolis Police Chief Arredondo was on 60 Minutes a few days ago, and just this morning, Bob Kroll, the president of the police union, was on CBS this morning. They both are, taking sides, but in your view, does the framework of the police union itself need some reform?
That's something that we'll find out. I think there is. I think this particular investigation should show that officers that are reprimanded are being treated differently than the norm. If that's found to be true, then the city council, along with the mayor, should take action. What exactly legal recourse that is, I don't know. I know in Minnesota it's illegal for police officers to strike, which I think is a good thing. However, then they have to have binding arbitration, or at least that's where it's led to. That's where the unions have brought it. That you throw everything at the arbitrator, and the arbitrator makes that decision. Because it's so important. Their job is so crucial that they stay on duty for public safety reasons.
You made the point during Senate debate that while there may be some bad apples among peace officers, the majority are not seeking to harm innocent people. So we're back to the balance question. Balance in allowing officers the tools that they need in training and use of force to ensure their own safety, but preventing unwarranted use of force, which is what we're really talking about, the unwarranted use of force. How do we prevent that?
Well, you do what you can do best, and that's to use the best armament you have, and that's your mouth. This is not a me against you type of situation. You're out there to protect the public, and you have to deal with whatever situation you have. And a real rule of thumb has always been, and I think the majority of the law enforcement feel this way, that you should be treating that person you're dealing with like it's your grandma, or like it's your friend, or it's like the way you would want to be treated. If you do that on a consistent basis, folks are going to know that, and it's going to be a much less adversarial issue. And that's good for both. There's a lot of officers that go home at night that have been in physical scuffles that some of them actually get disabled from that. They don't want that. They don't go on duty to see how many people we can beat up or how many we can shoot. That's just not part of, especially in the Midwest. I'm not saying it's done anywhere else, but the Midwest has always been known for their honesty, hardworking, and that reflects onto law enforcement as well, and it should.
So what do you ultimately hope to see happen?
Well, I'd like to see them take a look at this, and if there are some inconsistencies in the Minneapolis Police Department, do what it takes to correct that. But again, don't include everybody on that. If it's what it seems to be the big headline is the racism going on, then deal with that. Then we should deal with that, absolutely. But I think if you look at the numbers, you're going to find out that high crime areas are in different communities throughout the city, and that's where we expect our law enforcement to go, is into the high crime areas. And if that's an issue in that part of the community, that community should step up and try and change that. It's a little too late when an officer has to be called. So we've got a lot of work to do in Minneapolis, and I feel bad for Minneapolis. I feel for their safety. I feel for the people that come into the city, that they should be protected.
Senator Bill Ingebrigtsen, I want to thank you.
As always, nice to see you.
DFL Senator Richard Cohen was first elected to the Minnesota Senate in 1986. During his tenure, he served as chair of the Senate Finance Committee and has been nationally recognized for his work in promoting arts and culture. He's retiring from public office and recently bid his fellow senators farewell.
Let me offer some thoughts, however, if I might, about this place. And some negatives and positives. And I'm going to tell you what I don't like about this place and what I wish I could change about this place. And a blame is to be placed on all of us, on many of us, both parties. And that's the increased polarization of politics in this country and in this body. In my first go-around as chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, and prior to that, almost all of the omnibus finance bills passed with bipartisan votes. The only bill historically over the years that did not pass with such a vote was the omnibus tax bill. When we went from the minority in 12 back to the majority in 13, Katie, I don't know if you remember, you and I were talking, and Katie sat where Jerry sits. And we talked that, you know, for the last 2 years, we just voted red on everything. Now we're just voting green on everything. There really wasn't much of a difference. And I think the polarization has become difficult. Everybody I've served with are the most sincere folks I've met. And what I mean by that is I can look around the floor and I can find somebody that I align myself with totally in terms of politics and ideology. And I can look at somebody else who's 180 degrees removed from what I am. But I will tell you that person who's 180 degrees removed from what I am is absolutely sincere and absolutely well-meaning in what they represent. But I learned about Minnesota in this place. I learned what it's like to be a farmer in Minnesota. I learned about the issues of farming. I learned about the range. I learned about people who are tradespeople. I learned about the diversity of this state. And now I'm learning about the new diversity in the state. I'm learning from people like Fong He and Patricia Torres Ray, people who didn't grow up in their home district and who came here under such different and difficult circumstances. Growing up, I knew one set of immigrants, and that was it, and those were Holocaust survivors who lived in my district, and growing up with some other kids. But I've learned about a different Minnesota by serving this body. I've learned about the geography of this state by serving this body. And that's what all of you have allowed me to do. You've allowed me to know Minnesota, to serve Minnesota, and it has been such a great honor to work with all of you, serve with all of you. I'll miss all of you. And I hope if you remember me as anything, that I guess he was a pretty good guy.
This week, Governor Walz signed into law a bill passed during the recent special session that increases reimbursement rates in the Child Care Assistance Program, or CCAP for short. The program provides a child care subsidy for low-income families. Joining me to talk more about it is the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, Senator Michelle Benson. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
I'd like to start with the big picture. Last year, we learned from the legislative auditor that the Child Care Assistance Program was susceptible to fraud. This has been a sticking point with lawmakers recently over their willingness to increase the funding for the program. But on top of that, our state is facing a shortage of child care providers, and many providers have been hurt by COVID-19. So is this funding increase just a first step?
I think it is a first step. Commissioner Harpstead has taken some steps in program integrity, including having a Lean Six Sigma team go in and look at operations at the Office of Inspector General. There have been small policy changes made. I think we can go further to really disincentivize fraud in this program. Keep in mind, every dollar of fraud takes a dollar away from a provider who wants to provide a child care slot to someone who needs it, who needs the supportive help so that they can go back to work. So the crime isn't really the taking of money you're not supposed to take. The crime is that you're shorting that family who wants help, who wants to go to work, and who this program's meant for. And so we're going to keep pushing on program integrity. But this step was an attempt at compromise. The governor wanted a much bigger step. Senator Abler, my counterpart, wanted to do nothing until we were in a budget year in case there was general fund impact. And so we took a midpoint step, said we're going to update to current market rates and we're going to meet the federal minimum so we can draw down $65 million in federal money that will help our child care providers.
And so to that point, as I understand it, without this increase that was just passed, the state would have faced sanctions for not being at that federally mandated minimum 25th percentile, which, as I understand it, means that about 25% of a low-income family's child care costs is covered. Is that kind of right?
It's about a 25% subsidy based on a current market survey. So they do research around the state to look at what the cost of child care is, and then they subsidize up to 25% of that. And the sanctions, just so we're clear, $3.5 to $5 million, which isn't chump change, but in a program that had a high level of fraud, we didn't want to take unnecessary risk. And so saying we'll take a $3 million to $5 million hit while we wait for program integrity, I don't think was unreasonable. But in an effort to compromise and reach out during a special session, we did make some moves that should avoid the penalty and should get some money out. We'll just have to trust that the program integrity is going to be implemented.
And I want to come back to that in just a moment, but just for now, because the state is facing likely a budget shortfall due to COVID-19, is there significant impact of just coming up to the 25th percentile on the state budget as of now?
Most of it is covered by the federal CARES money. There was $20 million in CARES money for this program, this block grant, and then $65 million in federal money that had been accumulated from 2018, 2019, and 2020. What we don't see is off the spreadsheet. If the feds don't keep their promise, there will be general fund impact. And other states believe the feds will keep their promise. We haven't gotten certainty from the federal government that they'll keep their promise for 22, 23, 24. And so we took a bit of a risk. So we'll have to wait and see what the next budget cycle looks like.
But as of now, no immediate impact.
No immediate impact.
So I mentioned a moment ago the concerns over fraud in child care assistance. And with all that's happening with the pandemic, you're talking about grappling with that choice between program integrity and making sure that our child care providers, the ones that we have, don't go under in this pandemic, and noting that we've had a child care shortage for some time. Are your fraud concerns abating at least a little bit?
I have a little more comfort. This commissioner has taken the fraud seriously and brought in some really talented managers to watch over program integrity, but we need to see proof, and we need to see that program integrity is a continued priority. We also need to protect our child care providers, because if they walk away, our families can't go back to work. So even as the economy starts to open up, people who depend on child care can't go back to that employment. That makes it harder on those employers, and it further destabilizes the families and reduces revenue for our child care providers who've tried to hang on through this crisis from March until now.
So with the Federal CARES Act money, is it possible that some of that money could be directed towards these child care providers to keep them going? And should it be? And how much do you think they need?
So we did some state grants early on, center-based, and then family child care. So we used some state money for that. There's $20 million of federal CARES money going into this block grant, this program that you're talking about, CCAP. There's another $28 million that we're working on a formula to distribute in federal money that would be to help offset the cost of the regular cleaning that they need to do, offset the cost of if they have to buy masks or put up plexiglass, things like that. And so that money will be rolling out as well, but it has to be to people who are actively providing child care. And so if somebody had to shut down, or if, say, you're a school year preschool program, like in a church that has a school year preschool program, they might not be eligible. So we need to be attentive that there are other categories of providers that might need help. But in total, it looks like $48 million of federal CARES money will go to support these providers, both in this rate increase and then in specific statewide grants to help offset the cost of COVID preparation.
Finally, the federal government's recommendations for the Child Care Assistance Program is that it is funded at the 75th percentile. Minnesota has now come up to the 25th percentile.
Right.
Would you like to see Minnesota get to that 75th percentile, which I imagine would mean a lot for those low-income families?
I'd like to make childcare more accessible to Minnesotans overall, so lower the cost. Our providers don't get paid much as it is, but we still have some of the highest costs of childcare in the country. And so how do we lower the cost of the service while being respectful of the people who provide that service? So looking at good practices from other states. As to coming up to the 75th percentile, if it's a priority for the feds, then they should fund it.
Okay, Senator Benson, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely, glad to be here.
Senate photographer David Oakes has retired after more than 30 years at the Capitol. Here are some of his favorite images. Join us again next week as we delve into more topics affecting Minnesotans. I'm Shannon Loehrke, and on behalf of all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.